I know what financial suffocation looks like. It does not always look dramatic from the outside. Sometimes it looks like a quiet kitchen after everyone else has gone to bed. Sometimes it looks like a man staring at his phone but refusing to open the banking app. Sometimes it looks like a woman screening calls because every unfamiliar number feels like a threat. Sometimes it looks like two decent people lying to each other in small installments because the real math has become too frightening to say aloud. I have seen enough of life to know that financial pain is never only financial. It reaches into sleep, it reaches into dignity, it reaches into the tone of a marriage, the patience of a parent, the confidence of a worker, and the way a person walks into a room. That is why I want to begin with something I consider essential. Being broke is not a character trait. Being in debt is not a moral identity. It is a position, a painful position. Yes, a humiliating position in many cases, yes, but still a position. And positions can change. The most poisonous thing a person can do at the bottom is confuse his coordinates with his worth. The modern economy is very good at encouraging that confusion. It teaches people to judge themselves by visible comfort. It hands young workers credit before it hands them understanding. It advertises the appearance of prosperity more aggressively than it teaches the mechanics of building it. It tells people to celebrate every income increase with more consumption, more obligations, more subscriptions, more status purchases, more evidence that they are supposedly moving up. Then when the numbers stop working, the same person who was invited into the trap feels ashamed for being caught in it. I do not admire that game, but I also do not believe complaining about the game is enough to escape it. A person at the bottom has to do something harder than blame. He has to look. That is where almost every recovery begins. Not in optimism, not in motivation, in looking. Most people in financial trouble develop the same deadly habit: avoidance. They leave envelopes unopened, they skip emails from creditors, they memorize excuses, they tell themselves they will check the numbers tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week becomes another month. And while they are protecting themselves from discomfort, the math keeps moving without mercy. That is the nature of finance. It does not pause because you are overwhelmed. Interest does not take pity. Late fees do not respect your stress level. Avoidance feels like relief for an hour and behaves like gasoline on the fire for a year. So if I were sitting with someone who had hit bottom, I would start with the most unfashionable act in the world. A sheet of paper, a pen, every account opened, every balance written down, every debt, every minimum payment, every interest rate, every bill, every recurring obligation, no drama, no self-pity, no soft focus language, just numbers. The truth is almost always less terrifying once it becomes visible. The unknown monster is bigger than the known one. A person hiding from a negative $30,000 reality often suffers as if he were facing negative $300,000, because the imagination is permitted to run without boundaries. When the numbers finally sit on paper, something changes. The situation may still be ugly, but it becomes measurable. And once something is measurable, it becomes attackable. That is the first turning point, not hope. Clarity. I would go even further. I would tell that person something most people do not understand until much too late. Zero is not failure. Zero is graduation. The public fears zero because the public confuses zero with emptiness. I do not. If a person claws his way from deep in the negative back to zero, he has done something extraordinary. He has stopped the compounding machine from working against him. He has taken his neck out of the noose of high-interest debt. He has turned off a predator that was feeding while he slept. Zero is not the end of the story. Zero is the first clean line. That matters because many people at the bottom are not really trying to get rich yet. They are trying to stop bleeding. Those are different missions. You do not talk to a man in a burning house about landscaping. You get him out of the fire. And if a person is carrying credit card debt at ruinous rates, there is no legal investment in the ordinary world that is more urgent than killing that debt. People at the bottom always want the romantic answer. The secret trade, the heroic investment, the one magical move that turns desperation into escape. I have lived long enough to distrust magical answers. When a balance is growing at 20 or 25% against you, The first victory is not offensive. It is surgical. Stop the bleeding. That means something most people hate because it touches pride. Lifestyle quarantine. I have a name for one of the most expensive habits in modern life: the ego tax. The ego tax is what people pay to look less poor than they are. It is the premium attached to appearances, the car payment that exists mainly to signal adulthood, the phone upgrade that pretends to be necessary, the restaurant spending designed to preserve social belonging, the subscriptions so small individually that nobody respects them and so numerous collectively that they become a leak in the hull, the delivery charges, the premium coffee, the wardrobe purchases disguised as confidence, the weekends spent buying relief from a life whose real problem is structural. People do these things because they are terrified of looking poor. That terror is often stronger than their terror of becoming poor. That is madness, and it is everywhere. I have seen people earning modest wages drive vehicles that are mathematically incompatible with freedom. I have seen households one missed paycheck from crisis spend on convenience as though convenience were a birthright. I have seen people finance an identity and then call themselves unlucky when the bill arrives. The ego tax is not just wasteful. It is a direct transfer from your future self to strangers who will never rescue you. If I were trying to recover from financial collapse, I would attack the ego tax with no sentimentality at all. Subscriptions go, restaurant spending goes. Convenience spending gets interrogated. The expensive car gets sold if the math demands it. Housing gets reconsidered if it is crushing the plan. Not because suffering is noble, because oxygen matters more than image. A person in emergency conditions does not ask whether a cut is aesthetically pleasing. He asks whether it keeps him alive. This is where people usually meet resistance from the outside world. Friends call them extreme. Co-workers call them cheap. Family members say they are overreacting. People invite them out and act offended when they decline. That social resistance has a very simple explanation. Discipline makes undisciplined people uncomfortable. A person who begins acting with structure exposes the chaos that others are trying to normalize, so they mock it. Let them. I would rather be mocked on the road to strength than applauded on the road to servitude, and that is exactly what a debt trap is: servitude with better packaging. Now suppose the person follows that discipline long enough. He cuts hard, he attacks the highest interest debt first. He lives much smaller than his ego prefers. He becomes boring, he becomes repetitive, he becomes less available for entertainment and more available for recovery. At some point, the number finally gets dragged back toward zero. That is the first victory. But here is where the real misunderstanding begins. Most people think the game starts when they have money. That is not true. The game starts when they understand capital. Money is one form of capital. A man at $0 still possesses something of enormous value: time, attention, trainable ability. If he still has those, he is not empty. He is merely liquid in the wrong form. That is a crucial distinction. The financially broken person usually looks at his empty bank account and concludes that he has nothing. That is often false. He may have no financial capital. He may still possess hundreds or thousands of hours that can be converted into future income if handled correctly. That conversion is where many recoveries are born. Unfortunately, this is also where many recoveries die. A broke person comes home from work depleted. He wants escape. That is understandable. But understandable behavior is not always survivable. The phone offers fast anesthesia. The television offers passivity. Social media offers comparison. Video games offer counterfeit progress. Arguments online offer emotional stimulation disguised as relevance. A bar offers temporary forgetting. All of these things have one trait in common. They consume the very capital the broke person needs most. Evening hours, I want to put this plainly. If you are at 0 or below, your evenings are not casual time. They are your rescue fund. The average person treats the hours after work as recovery space, and there is some truth in that. Human beings are not machines. But a person in financial emergency is not living in average conditions. He is in triage. And in triage, 4 focused hours per evening can be worth more than an extra $1 of hourly wage. Why? because those hours can change what you are worth to the market. That is the whole game. The labor market is not sentimental. It does not pay according to your fatigue. It pays according to usefulness, scarcity, trust, and replacement. If a stranger can be trained to do your job your bargaining power will always be fragile. You can work harder at a low-value task and still remain trapped. Multiplying a small hourly rate by more exhausted hours often produces only a more exhausted version of the same problem. That is why brute effort is not enough. You must increase economic leverage. And leverage begins with becoming less replaceable. This is where I part company with the romantic nonsense people tell themselves when they are desperate. You do not need a miracle. You need a narrower, more valuable skill. Not 10 skills. One something specific enough that the market can recognize its usefulness and pay for it. It might be copywriting. It might be paid media management. It might be sales. It might be bookkeeping. It might be coding. It might be data work. It might be video editing. It might be HVAC diagnostics, advanced electrical work, plumbing specialization, machine maintenance, or some other technical trade. I do not care which path is selected nearly as much as I care that the path is concrete. A vague desire to make more money is not a strategy. A 6-month commitment to mastering one economically valuable function is a strategy. If I were coaching a person at zero, I would tell him to protect 4 evening hours with almost embarrassing seriousness. Not every evening, perhaps, because life does not always cooperate perfectly. But most evenings, and during those hours, he is not allowed to consume aimlessly. He is not allowed to wander. He is not allowed to call distraction self-care. He studies, he practices, he builds samples. He learns the language of the field. He solves small problems. He becomes useful in a specific direction. That period is frustrating because it often produces no immediate cash. This is where weak people quit. They say, I worked all week and my effort still has not paid me. They are evaluating the process too early. The first stage of skill compounding looks exactly like the first stage of financial compounding. Flat. That is why the same personality type fails at both. The person needs immediate visible reward. Markets and skill development do not care what he needs. They reward what accumulates, not what flatters. If a person can survive that early flat stage, the curve begins to change. He develops competence, then confidence rooted in competence, then small paid opportunities, then proof. And the first proof matters more than most people realize. I am talking about the first $1,000 made from upgraded ability rather than ordinary wage dependency. That first 1,000 is psychologically revolutionary. It is small compared with a lifetime of wealth. It is enormous compared with a lifetime of learned helplessness. When a person earns his first real side income, freelance fee, specialist payment, or skill-based check, he discovers something that cannot be taught properly through theory. He discovers that the market can pay him differently if he shows up differently. That is a life-altering realization. Most people live as renters of labor. They hand over hours and receive wages. The first skill, base 1,000, is different. It is not rented time in the old sense. It is evidence of leverage. A problem was solved. A capability was valued. The mind begins to change shape when that happens. And that is exactly why the next danger appears, lifestyle creep. This is the point where many recoveries get ambushed. The person has suffered for a long time. He has lived tightly. He has cut hard. He has worked evenings. He has endured mockery. Now, a little money finally appears, and he feels entitled to celebrate. That feeling is natural. It is also dangerous. The first $1,000 is seed. Most people treat seed like fruit. That is why they remain permanently close to the bottom. They convert proof into consumption. A nicer phone, a weekend of relief, a little visible reward, a slightly upgraded life. Then the income disappears, the expenses remain, and the old trap rebuilds itself under a new story. I have no objection to enjoyment. I object to premature enjoyment financed by capital that should still be compounding. If I were rebuilding from zero, I would live as though I were still broke for far longer than my emotions found comfortable. That is one of the most intelligent financial decisions a person can make. Delay visible upgrade. Protect invisible momentum. Reinvest early gains into better tools, deeper learning, stronger systems, and growth capacity. Not because deprivation is holy, because momentum is fragile. A snowball near the top of a mountain can survive a bump. A snowball the size of a fist can disappear in a warm hand. That is what early capital looks like. Small enough to die easily, important enough to protect ruthlessly. This is also where self-respect must be handled correctly. A lot of people at the bottom are starved not only for money but for evidence that they matter. So when early success appears, they want to display it. That display becomes proof of recovery. I understand the urge, I still reject the behavior. Real recovery is not what you can show after your first win. It is what remains after your 10th temptation. If I see a person make a little money and immediately expand his living costs, I do not call that progress. I call that the old psychology wearing new clothes. The real shift happens when a person earns more and keeps his life approximately where it was. Then the gap opens, and the gap is what saves people. The gap between what comes in and what must go out, the gap between improved usefulness and delayed consumption, the gap between earnings and ego. That gap is where future ownership is born, and ownership is always the real goal, not endless hustling, not endless self-optimization. Ownership. Assets that continue to matter when your body is resting, skills that continue to pay because they are scarce, capital that begins doing a share of the work. That handoff is the whole point. Labor starts the process. Ownership gradually takes over. Freedom lives somewhere in the transfer. The beautiful thing about building from zero this way is that the hardest earned lessons cannot be repossessed. Someone can take they cannot easily take the mind that learned how to create it. That distinction is worth a great deal. I have seen people inherit capital and remain inwardly weak because they never learned the machinery beneath it. They know how to spend. They know how to preserve appearances. They do not know how to rebuild if the external shell cracks. By contrast, a person who built himself from the bottom possesses a kind of financial resilience that does not show on a statement. He knows what to cut. He knows how to focus. He knows how to learn. He knows how to sell usefulness. He knows how to postpone reward. He knows how to survive the flat stage. That is real strength. I would trust that kind of person in a storm long before I trusted the one who has only ever floated in fair weather. There is one more poison that must be addressed here. Victim identity. Now I am not blind. There are unfair systems. There are predatory incentives. There are people born with enormous disadvantages and others born on soft cushions. All of that is real. But a person trying to rebuild must ask one brutally practical question. Which thoughts produce movement? If a thought produces only outrage, self-protection, and paralysis, it may be emotionally understandable and still financially fatal. The bottom is not escaped by moral commentary. It is escaped by useful behavior repeated with ridiculous persistence. That is why I care so much about making the process mechanical. A person in recovery should not be negotiating with himself every night. He should have rules. No entertainment until the learning block is finished. No major purchases from the first skill-based income. No borrowing for lifestyle. No pretending a want is a need. No financial lies inside the home. Rules create relief because they reduce decision fatigue. A rule-based life may look severe from outside. Inside it often feels calmer because the important arguments were settled in advance. That is the same reason good investing works. A sound system matters more than occasional bursts of inspiration. Now let me say something gentle but important. Rebuilding from zero is slow enough to make many people feel invisible. That invisibility is part of the cost. For a while, nobody applauds. You are cutting expenses. Nobody applauds. You are studying at night. Nobody applauds. You are saying no to dinners, trips, and social nonsense. Nobody applauds. You are making awkward choices to save transportation costs or housing costs. Nobody applauds. That is fine. Applause is not an asset. Many lives are quietly saved by habits that would never look impressive on social media. The people who need applause often stay poor because they keep trading long-term progress for short-term recognition. I would rather be privately improving than publicly admired. That has served me very well. At some point, if a person stays with this process, the pieces begin reinforcing one another. Debt declines, shame declines with it. Clarity rises, skill rises. Income from that skill begins to appear. The emergency fund becomes possible. Then the first real pile of capital appears. Then investment becomes relevant, not as fantasy escape, but as a sensible next chapter. That sequence is healthy. Most people try to reverse it. They want investment fantasy first, discipline second, skill development third, and behavior change never. It does not work. The order matters. First, face the math. Second, stop the bleeding. Third, eliminate the ego tax. Fourth, protect evening capital. Fifth, build rare usefulness. Sixth, guard the first earnings from lifestyle creep. Seventh, let the snowball grow until ownership begins to matter. That order is not glamorous. It is powerful. And I will tell you something else I believe strongly. A person who has done all that once is very difficult to destroy permanently. You can knock him down, you can frighten him, you can temporarily deplete his cash. What you cannot easily do is return him to ignorance. He knows too much. He understands how the machine is built. He has seen the relationship between behavior and freedom. He can start again faster because he does not have to rediscover the principles. That is why I reject the idea that zero is the end. Zero is often the first place where a person becomes teachable enough to finally build correctly. Comfort ruins many people because comfort allows sloppy habits to survive. Discomfort, if handled rationally, can create a cleaner structure that is not a celebration of suffering. It is an acknowledgement that pain, once faced honestly, can become information. If I had to condense the entire journey into a single sentence, it would be this: do not waste your bottom. The bottom teaches very expensive lessons. Get full value from them. Learn what false comfort cost you. Learn what vanity cost you. Learn what avoidance cost you. Learn what undirected evenings cost you. Learn what lack of skill leverage cost you. Then build in the opposite direction. Build a life where math is seen early. Build a life where fixed costs do not own your future. Build a life where your evenings create value instead of numbing pain. Build a life where the first extra money is protected instead of displayed. Build a life where ownership grows quietly in the background. That is how people escape. Not with a lucky ticket, not with a speech, not with outrage, with arithmetic, attention, and the willingness to look temporarily smaller while becoming structurally stronger. I have no interest in fake inspiration. The world is full of it. What I respect is durable improvement. If you are at the bottom, I do not want you to feel flattered. I want you to feel clear. You do not need to become someone else overnight. You need to stop lying to yourself, stop subsidizing your ego, stop surrendering your evenings, and start becoming expensive to replace. Then, when the first real money arrives, you must treat it as seed, not permission. Do that long enough. And the world changes shape, not because the world became fair, because you became deliberate. That is enough. In finance, enough deliberate behavior sustained over time can look miraculous to people who only study outcomes. It is not a miracle. It is structure. And structure is what turns a man from trapped to dangerous in the best possible way. That is where I would begin. At the paper, at the numbers, at the cuts. At the 4 hours, at the one skill, at the first 1,000. Then I would stay with it long enough for ownership to begin carrying the load that labor once carried alone. That is how a life gets rebuilt, quietly, without applause, without fantasy, but with a strength that few people can ever take away.